It was a quiet afternoon in a small, crowded city where life seemed to move in its own unhurried rhythm. People hurried past one another, carrying bags, briefcases, and invisible burdens, hardly noticing the beauty in ordinary moments. In the middle of all this, a young woman was sitting at a worn-out wooden table in a tiny coffee shop tucked between two high-rise buildings. She had a notebook open in front of her, and she scribbled thoughts furiously, as though she was chasing an idea that kept slipping away. Her eyes occasionally flicked to the window where sunlight poured in, catching specks of dust in the air. The light made her pause and smile faintly, as if something small had reminded her that life still held tiny moments of wonder. She didn't notice the world around her, too absorbed in her thoughts, too wrapped up in the invisible thread of longing she carried in her chest. On the other side of the city, a young man was walking along a busy street, hands shoved into the pockets of a jacket that had seen better days. His mind was restless, filled with unfinished projects, missed chances, quiet hopes that felt almost foolish in their intensity. He was a careful observer, always noticing details that others overlooked: the pattern of a crack in the sidewalk, the way the wind ruffled leaves, or how the street musician's fingers moved deftly across worn guitar strings. Something inside him yearned for connection, though he didn't fully understand it yet. His days were long and predictable, and he felt a strange ache from the absence of someone who could see him, not just notice him, but truly see him. Fate, however, has a way of finding its own rhythm even in the mundane. That afternoon, the two would meet, not with grand gestures or a dramatic encounter, but with a small, almost imperceptible moment that would linger in their memories forever. The young man, drawn by a sudden craving for coffee, stepped into the tiny shop where the woman was sitting. The bell above the door jingled softly, breaking her concentration. She looked up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and their eyes met for the briefest moment. It was like an unexpected chord struck in the middle of a familiar song, and yet beautiful. Neither spoke immediately. There was a hesitation that lingered in the air, a silent acknowledgement of curiosity, perhaps even recognition, though they had never met before. He ordered his drink, glancing around for a place to sit. The shop was nearly full, but one small table remained across from her. He approached it slowly, noticing the notebook in front of her, the way she bit her lip as she wrote, lost in her own world. She noticed him too, but only just enough to acknowledge his presence with a fleeting glance before returning to her scribbles. He sat down, careful not to make noise, though the chair creaked under his weight. The smell of coffee and baked bread filled the space between them. Silence stretched comfortably, punctuated only by the scratch of her pen and the occasional clatter from the counter. She sensed his quiet attention, though she wasn't sure why it felt different from the usual presence of strangers. There was no pressure, no demand. Just a shared space where two strangers existed alongside one another in a delicate equilibrium. Minutes passed, and he finally spoke, almost casually, as if testing the waters. He commented on something trivial, a book lying on the table next to her, a detail that seemed insignificant, yet it sparked a ripple of recognition. She looked up, surprised by the observation. It was a simple exchange, words bouncing back and forth lightly, yet each word seemed to carry weight. Laughter followed, tentative at first, then more freely. They found themselves leaning in, drawn by the rhythm of conversation, each discovering something in the other that mirrored their own unspoken thoughts. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace. But inside the small coffee shop, time seemed to bend. They shared stories of ordinary days and secret dreams, of moments that shaped them and fears they barely admitted to themselves. She spoke of the places she longed to visit and the books that had changed her, while he recounted small victories and quiet regrets, moments of bravery that no one had witnessed. There was an unspoken understanding that each was listening not just to the words, but to the pauses, the silences, the subtle cues that revealed more than speech ever could. Ours seemed to slip by unnoticed. A soft rain began outside, tapping against the window in a gentle rhythm, but they hardly noticed. They were wrapped in a bubble of discovery, each revelation bridging the gap between strangers and something more fragile, more precious. She realized she was laughing more freely than she had in weeks. He noticed how her eyes sparkled when she talked about things she loved, how her expressions changed subtly when she recalled memories both joyful and painful. At one point, the conversation fell into a quiet lull. Neither of them felt the need to fill it. He watched her scribble something in her notebook, and she watched him trace the rim of his cup with his finger. In that silence, they felt the pulse of something unspoken, a delicate thread that connected them even without acknowledgement. It was a first, tentative connection, the kind that lingers long after the encounter ends, whispering in the corners of memory. Eventually, the rain eased and the light outside shifted, casting soft, golden hues across the shop. They realized hours had passed unnoticed, and a subtle reluctance crept into the space between them. Neither wanted to leave, yet life outside the coffee shop demanded its return. Words were exchanged careful, light words that hinted at the desire to see one another again, without the weight of expectation. They parted with a glance, a smile, and the faintest touch of hands as they exchanged contact information. A modern token of connection in a world that often felt disconnected. As she stepped back onto the street, the city seemed louder, harsher, and yet somehow more alive. The encounter left a warmth in her chest, a fluttering that refused to be ignored. She replayed each detail in her mind, the sound of his voice, the way his eyes had crinkled when he smiled, the quiet confidence he carried without pretense. It felt surreal, yet comforting, like discovering a melody she didn't know she had been waiting for. He walked the other way, feeling the weight of the afternoon linger with him. The world seemed sharper, colors richer, and the ordinary moments of life imbued with a new significance. He found himself smiling at strangers, noticing details he would have previously ignored, thinking about the conversation that had felt so natural, so rare. It was the kind of day that didn't end neatly. It left an echo in the heart long after it had passed. Neither knew what the future held. Perhaps it was nothing more than a fleeting connection, a beautiful anomaly in the endless tide of life. Yet, even the possibility felt like hope that two people could stumble into one another and recognize, however briefly, the reflection of something they had been searching for all along. They returned to their lives, carrying the memory of a quiet coffee shop, the sound of laughter, and the gentle spark that had quietly ignited between them that evening. As the city lights flickered on and the streets filled with the hum of activity, both paused in separate corners of the world. Each held on to a fragment of the afternoon, replaying it, wondering, hoping. Life would continue, challenges would come, and the ordinary grind would pull them in different directions. But the memory of that first meeting lingered, tender and fragile, like the first page of a story waiting to be written fully. And deep down, both knew that something had begun. Something quiet, yet undeniable. Something that might just change the course of their lives if nurtured with care. The world outside was vast, unpredictable and relentless. Yet in that small coffee shop, two strangers had found a moment of connection that transcended the ordinary. It was a beginning, delicate and uncertain, but real. It carried with it the promise of laughter, of shared dreams, of challenges faced together, and perhaps in time, of love that could leave an indelible mark on their hearts. And with that promise tucked quietly in their hearts, they stepped back into the world, unaware of the journey ahead, yet subtly altered by the magic of an unexpected meeting. Days passed after their first meeting, and both found themselves unexpectedly thinking about that afternoon. The memory of shared laughter, subtle smiles, and quiet understanding seemed to settle into their routines like a gentle echo. Life continued in its ordinary rhythm, yet there was now a faint, unspoken anticipation hovering in their minds. Each day felt slightly different, colored by the hope of seeing each other again. It was a sensation neither had experienced. In a long time, an excitement not tied to grand events, but to the simple possibility of connection, the young woman found herself returning to the same coffee shop more often than before. Not with the intention of seeing him again, she told herself, but rather seeking a familiar corner, a place to think. The smell of coffee, the worn tables, and the soft hum of conversation became comforting, a place where her thoughts could wander freely. She scribbled in her notebook, yet the words seemed lighter, freer, She found herself writing about laughter and small joys instead of the usual worries and frustrations. Something inside her had shifted, a subtle openness that she hadn't noticed before. Meanwhile, the young man could not focus on work as easily as before. Each phone notification, each passing stranger, each flicker of light seemed to pull his mind back to that quiet coffee shop. He replayed their conversation in his mind, recalling not just the words but the pauses, the gestures, the slight nervousness that had seemed so endearing. It was not obsession, he reminded himself, but a quiet fascination with someone who seemed to understand parts of life he rarely shared with anyone else. There was a yearning to know more, to see if the connection was as real and delicate as it felt that day. Fate, as it often does, nudged them together again. One afternoon, their paths crossed unexpectedly in a small bookstore nestled on a side street. The young woman was thumbing through a collection of poetry, lost in the soft rhythm of words, when she noticed him standing a few feet away, examining the cover of a novel. They froze for a moment, caught in the shared recognition that both had been hoping, perhaps subconsciously, for. The familiarity brought a warm smile to both faces, a quiet relief that neither had imagined but now felt natural. They exchanged greetings, casual yet tinged with a subtle excitement. The conversation flowed easily, as if no time had passed since the coffee shop encounter. They discussed favorite authors, shared the books that had influenced them, and debated ideas with gentle humor and curiosity. Each found comfort in the other's perspective. Noticing the way thoughts were expressed and emotions were hinted at without heavy words, it was effortless, yet meaningfuler, rare blend that left both quietly exhilarated as the hours passed. They decided to explore a nearby park, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the path. They walked side by side, their steps occasionally matching, occasionally drifting apart, yet always returning to the subtle rhythm of conversation. They spoke of dreams they had kept close to their hearts, ambitions that felt too fragile to share with most people, and the small victories that often went unnoticed in everyday life. The more they spoke, the more they realized how much they had in common, not just in interests but in outlooks and how they perceived the world. And in the quiet ways they carried themselves, they discovered a shared love for moments that many overlooked, watching clouds shift in the sky, feeling the first drops of rain, or savoring the taste of a pastry just fresh from the oven. These simple joys, they realized, were precious precisely because they were easy to forget. Their connection deepened, not through grand gestures, but through acknowledgement of these tiny, delicate details that often passed unnoticed. The unspoken understanding created a sense of intimacy that neither could have anticipated, leaving them both feeling unusually seen and appreciated. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, a quiet melancholy settled into the moment. They had not planned to part ways yet, and neither wanted to. But the inevitable pull of reality reminded them that life continued beyond the park. They found a bench under a tree and sat side by side, not speaking immediately, letting the sounds of rustling leaves and distant city noise fill the comfortable silence. It was a silence that spoke volumes, conveying a sense of connection that words alone could not capture. She finally broke the quiet, sharing a small personal story about her childhood that she had rarely told anyone. He listened intently, not interrupting, his eyes reflecting understanding and empathy. When she finished, he shared a memory of his own, equally intimate, revealing vulnerabilities that had long been tucked away. The exchange was unhurried, sincere, and filled with a gentle respect that neither had expected but both cherished. In that moment, they realized that trust, however small, had begun to grow between them. Their conversation meandered from light-hearted anecdotes to deeper reflections, creating a tapestry of shared understanding. They laughed at past mistakes, sympathized with each other's struggles, celebrated small victories that had gone unnoticed by the world. It was a dialogue that nurtured curiosity, empathy, and a tentative bond that was stronger than either could have imagined at the start. They began to see not just each other's faces, but glimpses of their inner worlds, fragile and complex, yet quietly resilient. Eventually, the sky darkened and streetlights flickered on. casting a soft glow over the city. They reluctantly stood, knowing it was time to part, but the hesitancy lingered. The young man suggested meeting again soon, perhaps to walk through the park once more, or to explore another quiet corner of the city together. She agreed, her voice soft but certain, signaling that this connection was becoming an essential part of her days. They exchanged a lingering glance, one filled with unspoken promises and tentative hope, before finally going their separate ways, back in their respective spaces. The memory of the afternoon settled into their hearts, leaving a subtle ache and a quiet joy. They replayed conversations, the cadence of laughter, and the depth of unspoken understanding, realizing that these moments, small and delicate, had begun to shape their lives in unexpected ways. Each found themselves carrying a sense of anticipation for the next meeting, a gentle excitement that infused ordinary routines with a sense of possibility as days turned into weeks. They continued to meet in small, unplanned ways, a chance encounter at a market, a brief chat on a quiet street, or a shared coffee during a busy afternoon. With each interaction, the bond grew stronger. It's grounded not in grand declarations, but in the accumulation of small, meaningful moments. They began to notice the nuances of each other's expressions, the quiet gestures that revealed emotions, and the subtle ways they complemented one another. It was a connection built slowly, organically, and authentically. Yet, even in the warmth of growing closeness, there was an underlying tension. Both were aware of life's unpredictability, the fragility of human connection, and the possibility that circumstances might not allow their bond to flourish fully. The awareness of this uncertainty added depth to their interactions, fusing each smile, conversation, and shared moment with an intensity that was both exhilarating and terrifying. They began to understand that true connection often comes with risk, the risk of vulnerability, disappointment, and unspoken fears. One evening, as they walked along a quiet street lined with trees, the young woman paused to admire a small fountain that shimmered under the soft glow of nearby lights. He stood beside her, silent, yet his presence spoke volumes. They watched the water dance and reflect the colors of the lamps, and in that moment, a profound sense of peace settled between them. Words were unnecessary. The shared appreciation of beauty and quiet companionship was enough to affirm the bond that had been slowly growing. It was in these simple, unassuming moments that they found a sense of belonging, a quiet confirmation that they had discovered something rare. Their relationship continued to develop in this understated yet meaningful way. They shared experiences, encouraged one another's dreams, and offered support during moments of doubt and difficulty. Each interaction reinforced the sense of connection. It's not through dramatic events or declarations, but through consistency, attentiveness, and genuine care. The growing intimacy was characterized by subtlety, patience, and a deep understanding of one another's rhythms, emotions, and needs as weeks turned into months. Their bond became an integral part of their daily lives. They began to anticipate each other's presence, finding comfort in familiarity and excitement in discovery. Small gestures, a shared smile across a crowded room, a thoughtful message during a busy day, or the choice to sit quietly together in comfortable silence became the markers of a relationship that is both tender and resilient. Each moment reinforced the understanding that love is not always found in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small, meaningful connections that build trust, understanding, and deep emotional resonance. Despite the joy in connection, challenges inevitably arose. Conflicting schedules, personal responsibilities, and the pressures of life occasionally intruded, creating tension and moments of frustration. Yet these challenges were met with patience, communication, and a shared commitment to understanding. The young woman and the young man began to realize that love, in its truest form, is not without obstacles, but rather strengthened by the willingness to navigate them together. They learned to appreciate the delicate balance between individuality and connection, recognizing that the depth of their bond was measured not just by shared joy, but by resilience in the face of difficulty. In quiet moments, when the city was bathed in the soft glow of evening lights and the hum of life slowed to a gentle rhythm, they would reflect on the journey so far. The initial spark of recognition, the laughter and shared stories, the growing intimacy, and the subtle understanding all contributed to a sense of belonging that neither had anticipated, but now cherished deeply. It was a love that had begun quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet with a strength that resonated in the smallest gestures, the softest words, and the tenderest moments of shared presence. And so, life continued, colored by the presence of this delicate connection. They moved through ordinary days with a sense of heightened awareness, noticing beauty, kindness, and possibility in ways that felt new and profound. The bond that had begun in a quiet coffee shop had grown into something meaningful, tender, and resilient, shaping their experiences, perceptions, and hopes. It was a connection that promised growth, challenges, and shared joy, carrying with it the potential for a love that could leave an indelible mark on both their hearts. Life, as it often does, began to test the delicate connection between the two. After months of quiet bonding, shared moments, and subtle growth, challenges started creeping in. Not as dramatic events, but as small, persistent obstacles that created tension. Both had their routines, responsibilities, and personal struggles, and the increasing demands of life made it difficult to maintain the ease and frequency of their interactions. The small joys and casual conversations they had taken for granted suddenly seemed harder to find, and the simple act of being present for one another required more effort and intention. It began with misunderstandings, innocent miscommunications that carried heavier weight than they should have. A missed message, a delayed response, or a poorly interpreted comment triggered unnecessary worry. Each found themselves replaying the incident in their minds, questioning intentions and feelings. Though the bond was strong, the new distance created a vulnerability neither had anticipated. The young woman, who often relied on thoughtful reflection, began doubting if the connection was as meaningful to him as it felt to her. The young man, who was sensitive to subtle shifts in emotion, feared he had done something to disappoint her, though he couldn't pinpoint what. The tension was subtle at first. Their meetings, once effortless, now carried an undercurrent of unease. Conversations started to require careful thought, and laughter, which had flowed freely before, now felt tentative. They still cared for one another deeply, but the simplicity of their bond was being tested by the complexities of life, personal insecurities, and fear of disappointment. Both were learning that love, even when tender and genuine, was not immune to challenges, and that the strength of a connection could only be measured when confronted by difficulties. One rainy afternoon, they happened to meet in the same coffee shop where their journey had quietly begun. The familiar space, once a source of comfort, now seemed heavy with unspoken questions. They exchanged greetings, but the ease of previous encounters was missing. Words were carefully chosen, and silences stretched longer than before. Each moment felt like a delicate balancing act, where one wrong move could heighten the strain. They both recognized the tension, but lacked the courage to address it directly at first. The conversation eventually shifted towards safer topics: the weather, work, and mundane details of life. Yet beneath the surface, both were acutely aware of the growing distance. The young woman felt an ache in her chest, a longing to reach out, yet also a fear of vulnerability that might lead to disappointment. The young man sensed her hesitation, wishing he could bridge the gap, but unsure how to approach it without seeming intrusive. It was a painful paradox. They both wanted closeness, yet were held back by fear. Days turned into a week of minimal contact, and the absence was palpable. Each replayed memories, wishing for the comfort of laughter and conversation they had once shared effortlessly. The young woman found herself staring at her notebook, attempting to write about ordinary life, but her thoughts constantly drifted back to him, to the moments of understanding and connection that had made her heart feel lighter. The young man, amidst the bustle of his responsibilities, found himself distracted by the memory of her smile, the softness in her voice, and the quiet joy she brought into his life. It was a reminder that even amidst distance, the bond remained fragile yet persistent. Finally, after several days of silent reflection, the the young woman decided to take a step toward resolution. She sent a simple message, acknowledging the tension without blame, expressing a desire to reconnect. The young man responded with equal sincerity, admitting his own doubts and fears. This exchange, though brief, marked the beginning of a slow, careful reconciliation. It was not dramatic, nor was it perfect, but it was real, filled with honesty and a shared commitment to understanding each other better. When they next met in the park, the air carried both the weight of recent tension and the hope of renewed connection. They walked side by side in quiet contemplation, the gentle rustling of leaves providing a natural rhythm for reflection. Conversation began cautiously, yet as they spoke, the tension slowly eased. Apologies were exchanged, not for grand mistakes, but for the subtle ways their actions and inactions had caused doubt. They listened deeply, absorbing each other's perspective, and discovered that despite the strain, their bond had grown stronger, reinforced by the willingness to confront discomfort together. Over time, they faced additional challenges, some arising from external circumstances, others from personal insecurities. There were moments of frustration when plans fell through, of disappointment when expectations went unmet, and of sadness when life's pressures intruded on their time together. Yet each difficulty was met with patience and communication. They learned the importance of expressing feelings honestly, listening without judgment, offering reassurance even when words felt insufficient. The trials were not overcome by avoidance or denial, but by commitment to understanding and nurturing the fragile connection they shared. During these months, they also began to explore deeper layers of each other's personalities. They discussed fears, past experiences, and unspoken longings, discovering facets of character and emotion that had previously remained hidden. Each revelation brought them closer, fostering empathy, trust, and a sense of shared vulnerability. They realized that the depth of their bond was not measured solely by joy, but by the willingness to navigate challenges, support one another in moments of doubt, and celebrate growth together. There were quiet, tender moments that punctuated this period of adjustment. On one chilly evening, they found themselves sitting on a park bench under the soft glow of streetlights. The young woman shared a personal story of loss, her voice trembling slightly, while the young man listened with attentive empathy. In return, he revealed a hidden struggle he had rarely spoken of, and she offered comfort without hesitation. The exchange, simple yet profound, reinforced the understanding that vulnerability, when met with kindness and care, could strengthen rather than weaken their connection. Despite the challenges, life also offered opportunities for small joys. They discovered new cafes, wandered through quiet streets, and shared meals in modest restaurants that held a charm all their own. Each experience, though ordinary, carried a sense of novelty and delight because it was shared. They laughed at minor mishaps, celebrated small achievements, and reveled in the quiet comfort of companionship. It was during these moments that they realized the essence of their connection. Love and understanding were nurtured not solely by grand gestures, but by consistent, heartfelt presence in one another's lives. However, the challenges were not confined to personal insecurities or misunderstandings. External pressures also began to weigh on their relationship. Work obligations, family responsibilities, and unexpected events demanded attention, often pulling them in different directions. There were days when they could only exchange brief messages or meet fleetingly, and the longing for extended connection grew stronger. Yet, even in these moments of separation, their bond persisted. Sustained by the memories of shared laughter, meaningful conversations, and mutual respect, the young woman occasionally questioned whether the connection could withstand prolonged challenges, while the young man worried about disappointing her or failing to meet her expectations. These doubts were natural, yet they served as a catalyst for growth. Both began to recognize the importance of patience, empathy, and understanding in sustaining meaningful relationships. They learned that love was not simply a feeling, but a practice and ongoing commitment to communication, care, and mutual support. One afternoon, they found themselves at a small art exhibit, admiring paintings that captured fleeting moments and emotions. As they moved from one piece to another, they discussed their interpretations, finding resonance in each other's perspectives. The conversation flowed effortlessly, blending humor, curiosity, and thoughtful reflection. They discovered that shared experiences, particularly those that encouraged introspection, could deepen their bond, creating layers of understanding that transcended superficial connection. As the season shifted and the days grew shorter, they faced moments of physical and emotional distance. Yet even in separation, they maintained a sense of presence in each other's lives. Thoughtful messages, small acts of consideration, and genuine concern bridged gaps created by circumstance. They realized that sustaining connection required both effort and intentionality, but that the rewards, a sense of belonging, understanding, and shared joy were worth the endeavor. By the end of this period, they had emerged stronger and more attuned to one another. The challenges they faced had tested their bond, revealing both vulnerabilities and strengths. They had learned that connection is not static. It requires care, attention, and resilience. Each obstacle, whether arising from internal doubts or external circumstances, provided an opportunity to grow, to deepen trust, and to reinforce commitment. Through patience, communication, and empathy, they discovered that love, even in its most tender form, can withstand the pressures of life when nurtured thoughtfully. As they sat together one quiet evening, watching the city lights reflect in the river, a sense of calm settled over them. They held hands without speaking, understanding that the bond they had nurtured through months of shared moments, challenges, and reflection was real, resilient, and deeply meaningful. The connection they had cultivated was no longer fragile, though still delicate. It was built on mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to face life's uncertainties together. They realized that love, at its core, is not defined by perfection or the absence of difficulties, but by the willingness to remain present, to listen, and to care deeply despite challenges. Their relationship, tested and refined through months of experience, had transformed into something profound, quiet, and enduring. It was a love that had grown not in grand declarations, but in the accumulation of small, meaningful moments, mutual understanding, and steadfast support. And so life continued, with all its complexities and uncertainties, yet both moved forward with a strengthened bond. The lessons learned through misunderstanding, distance, and challenge provided a foundation for future growth. They knew that obstacles would continue to arise, but they also understood that connection, empathy, and resilience were powerful forces that could sustain love, even in difficult times. Through shared experiences, vulnerability, and consistent care, they had discovered a depth of connection that promised not only intimacy and joy, but also the capacity to navigate life's unpredictable journey together. The following weeks brought a quiet sense of revelation and clarity. After months of navigating the challenges of daily life, misunderstandings, and emotional tension, both began to realize just how deeply the other had become a part of their world. The young woman found herself thinking about him not only in moments of longing, but also with an awareness of how he inspired her to embrace life more fully. His presence, even in thought alone, brought comfort and a subtle courage that had been missing before. She noticed small changes in herself, the way she smiled more freely, the way she approached challenges with less fear, and the renewed sense of hope that had begun to pervade her thoughts. The young man, in turn, felt a growing understanding of the young woman's quiet strength and resilience. He noticed the gentle courage in the way she carried herself, the thoughtful ways she approached life, and the depth of her empathy for others. He found himself reflecting on his own actions, recognizing how their bond had helped him become more patient, attentive, and open. Each interaction reminded him that the connection they shared was not only emotional, but also a mirror reflecting their personal growth. They were shaping one another's lives in subtle but profound ways, reinforcing the idea that true connection nurtures both hearts equally. One crisp morning, they arranged to meet in a small botanical garden tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The garden, with its winding paths, delicate flowers, and the soft hum of bees, offered a peaceful escape from the bustle of life. They walked slowly along the gravel paths, their conversation flowing with ease and warmth. This time, there was a new sense of openness, shared awareness that their relationship had endured challenges and had emerged more resilient. The tension and unease of previous months had softened, replaced by a calm certainty in the presence of one another as they wandered. They spoke about their dreams with a newfound clarity. The young woman shared hopes she had long kept private, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. He listened attentively, offering encouragement and insight without judgment. In return, he revealed aspirations he had once considered impractical or far-fetched. She responded with genuine interest and support. It was a moment of mutual discovery, where vulnerability was met with understanding, and shared ambitions created a sense of partnership. In that quiet garden, amidst the delicate petals and gentle sunlight, they began to envision a future together, one not defined by grand gestures, but by the steady accumulation of shared moments, dreams, and support. They sat on a weathered bench near a small pond, watching the water ripple in response to a soft breeze. Silence settled between them, comfortable and filled with unspoken emotion. The young woman finally spoke, her voice low and thoughtful. She expressed gratitude for the patience, understanding, and care he had shown throughout their journey together. The young man responded in kind, acknowledging the strength, insight, and warmth she had brought into his life. It was an exchange that went beyond mere words. It was a reaffirmation of their connection, a recognition that the bond they had nurtured was rooted in authenticity, empathy, and shared growth. As the day continued, they explored the hidden corners of the garden, discovering secluded benches, clusters of wildflowers, and the quiet songs of birds. Each new discovery was accompanied by laughter, gentle conversation, and moments of shared reflection. They began to realize that the beauty of life often resided in the details, the texture of a leaf, the subtle color variations in petals, or the way sunlight danced across the water. By noticing these small wonders together, they deepened their appreciation for one another and the world around them. It was a subtle, profound lesson. Connection is strengthened when shared attention is given not only to each other, but also to the world that surrounds them later. As the afternoon light softened and shadows stretched longer, they found themselves seated beneath an old oak tree. Its branches reached high into the sky, leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The young woman rested her hand lightly on the young man's, gesture of trust and closeness that felt natural and unforced. They spoke of the future, not in terms of certainty, but with a hopeful curiosity, acknowledging the unpredictability of life while embracing the possibility of shared experiences. The conversation was filled with a sense of commitment, not through explicit declarations, but through the understanding that presence, care, and empathy were the foundations of enduring connection. As the sun began to dip lower, casting a golden glow across the garden, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. They remembered the quiet coffee shop where they first met, the laughter, the shared stories, and the moments of vulnerability that had allowed trust to grow. They acknowledged the challenges they had faced, the misunderstandings, the distance, and the occasional doubt. San recognized how these obstacles had strengthened their bond. The realization was subtle yet profound. Love, in its truest form, is not defined by perfection or ease, but by resilience, patience, and the willingness to grow together. That evening, they walked slowly back through the city's streets, hand in hand, their steps in quiet harmony. The city, once bustling and overwhelming, now seemed softer, more vibrant, and full of possibilities. Each corner held memories of small adventures, shared smiles, and the gentle rhythm of companionship. They discovered joy not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the ordinary shared walks, thoughtful conversations, and the quiet assurance of presence in the days that followed. They continued to nurture their connection with conscious effort and attention. They communicated openly about challenges, offered support during moments of doubt, and celebrated each other's growth and achievements. They learned to navigate the balance between individuality and togetherness. understanding that a strong connection requires both personal space and shared experiences. Each interaction reinforced trust, empathy, and a growing sense of intimacy, creating a foundation for a bond that could endure life's uncertainties. They also explored new experiences together, seeking out activities that encouraged discovery, creativity, and reflection. They attended small cultural events, wandered through quiet neighborhoods, and shared meals in modest restaurants that offered comfort and charm. Each experience, though seemingly ordinary, was infused with significance because it was shared, creating lasting memories and deepening their understanding of one another. The joy they found in these moments was not derived from extravagance, but from attentiveness, presence, and mutual appreciation. Throughout this period, both were increasingly aware of the subtle changes in their lives influenced by one another. The young woman noticed a renewed sense of confidence, curiosity, and openness to new experiences. The young man became more patient, reflective, and attuned to the emotional nuances of life. Each recognized that their connection was shaping them in ways both small and profound, fostering personal growth, resilience, and a deeper appreciation for the beauty of human connection. Despite the sense of harmony, they remained mindful of the challenges that life inevitably presented. Responsibilities, unforeseen events, and personal struggles continued to test their bond. Yet, armed with the lessons learned from previous trials, they approached difficulties with patience, empathy, and mutual support. They realized that sustaining a meaningful connection requires continuous effort, open communication, and a willingness to embrace vulnerability without fear. The challenges, rather than weakening their bond, became opportunities to reaffirm commitment, understanding, and shared growth as weeks turned into months. They found comfort in the consistency of their connection. Regular meetings, thoughtful gestures, and shared experiences created a sense of stability and trust. They began to understand that love is not merely a fleeting emotion, but a practice nurtured through presence, care, and understanding. Each day they discovered new aspects of each other, deepening empathy and reinforcing the value of attentive companionship. Their bond was no longer fragile or uncertain. It was a living, evolving connection that responded to life's challenges with grace and resilience. One evening, as they sat quietly in a small park, observing the reflections of city lights on a gentle stream, the young woman leaned against the young man, feeling a sense of peace and belonging that had grown steadily over months of shared experience. They reflected on the journey so far, the laughter, the challenges, and the quiet triumphs of understanding and patience. Each memory reinforced the knowledge that connection, once nurtured with care and attention, could withstand uncertainty, distance, and life's unpredictability in this quiet moment. They understood that the essence of their bond was not dramatic declarations or public gestures, but the accumulation of small, meaningful moments. Each shared smile, thoughtful conversation, and gentle touch contributed to a tapestry of understanding, trust, and empathy. They recognized that love, at its most enduring, is built on the subtle, continuous acts of presence, attention, and care that sustain connection through life's complexities. As the night deepened and the city's hum softened, they stood and began walking home, side by side. Their hands brushed, fingers intertwined, and a quiet contentment settled over them. They carried with them the lessons of patience, empathy, and understanding, confident that their bond was resilient, tender, and real. The journey ahead remained uncertain, filled with both challenges and possibilities. But they faced it together, strengthened by the shared growth, trust, and quiet joy that had blossomed over time. Thus, life continued, colored by the presence of a connection that had endured trials, nurtured understanding, and fostered personal growth. They moved forward with awareness, empathy, and hope, knowing that love, when cultivated with care and intention, could provide both stability and inspiration. Each day became an opportunity to explore, learn, and deepen their bond, reinforcing the understanding that enduring connection is shaped not by perfection, but by shared experience, patience, and the willingness to grow together through life's unpredictable journey. Time moved gently, as it always does, but the bond between the two had become a constant, steady presence in their lives. They had shared laughter, quiet confidences, small adventures, and moments of vulnerability that knit their hearts together in ways neither could have anticipated. Yet the final months of their shared journey brought new layers of understanding, emotion, and a bittersweet awareness of life's fleeting moments. It began with a realization that neither had spoken aloud, but both had felt growing quietly. They were profoundly important to one another. It was not merely friendship, nor a passing infatuation, but a connection that resonated with the core of their beings. The young woman felt a deep sense of comfort whenever he was near, a sensation that went beyond words or actions. She noticed how his presence could soothe her anxieties, how his quiet support made challenges feel lighter, and how the simple rhythm of conversation with him brought clarity to thoughts that had once been tangled. For the young man, the recognition was equally powerful. He saw in her the courage, empathy, and understanding that he had long searched for in the people around him. Her laughter, once a casual sound, now carried warmth that lingered long after hearing it. The way she noticed small details, cared about others, approached life with quiet determination, made him appreciate the depth of her character. The realization that his life was richer, calmer, and more meaningful because of her presence settled gently in his heart, leaving a quiet gratitude that words could not fully express. As autumn approached, they began to spend longer stretches of time together, savoring the moments without the pressure of obligation or schedule. One crisp afternoon, they wandered through a park filled with golden leaves, each step accompanied by the crunch of fallen foliage beneath their feet. They spoke of memories from the past months, of challenges faced and overcome, and of small victories that had deepened their bond. Laughter mixed with soft silences as each moment revealed the subtle ways they had become essential parts of each other's lives. They discovered a rhythm in there, a companionship, a balance between shared experiences and personal reflection. Sometimes they would simply sit together, watching the world unfold without the need for words. Other times, they explored new parts of the city, discovering hidden cafes, quiet streets, and small gardens that seemed to exist just for them. Each experience was infused with meaning because it was shared, and every shared experience reinforced the connection that had grown slowly, patiently, and authentically. The young woman, one evening, expressed a fear she had carried quietly, the possibility that circumstances might eventually pull them apart. The young man listened with a seriousness that conveyed his full attention. He reassured her, not with grand promises or dramatic gestures, but with honesty, empathy, and a commitment to remain present and attentive to the bond they shared. Their conversation was long, quiet at times, and deeply reflective. It was a moment that solidified their understanding that connection requires ongoing care, intentionality, and openness to vulnerability. As days turned into weeks, the small gestures that defined their relationship became more meaningful. A shared cup of tea in the morning, a thoughtful message in the afternoon, or a gentle touch as they walked side by side became symbols of care and attention. They realized that love is often not defined by extraordinary events, but by the accumulation of consistent and attentive acts that reinforce trust, understanding, and empathy. The beauty of their bond was in the simplicity of presence, the honesty of expression, and the comfort of knowing that they could rely on each other. One late afternoon, they found themselves sitting on a hill overlooking the city, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the city lights began to twinkle below. They sat quietly, hand in hand, absorbing the beauty around them and the sense of togetherness that had grown over months of shared experiences. The young woman rested her head lightly on the young man's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and the quiet understanding that had blossomed between them filled her with warmth. The young man spoke softly, reflecting on the journey they had shared. He mentioned the initial spark in the coffee shop, the challenges they had faced, and the small victories that had shaped their bond. She listened, feeling a deep appreciation for the patience, empathy, and understanding that had defined their relationship. It was a moment of quiet reflection and mutual recognition, where both understood that love, in its most enduring form, is built on shared experience, resilience, and emotional presence. In the following days, they continued to nurture their connection through thoughtful attention and shared activities. They cooked simple meals together, walked through quiet streets in the evening, and spent hours in conversation, exploring ideas, dreams, and reflections on life. Each interaction, though ordinary in appearance, carried a profound significance because it was part of a relationship rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and emotional honesty. They learned that connection deepens not only through joyful experiences but also through patience, empathy, and shared reflection. As the season changed further, the reality of time's passage became more evident. They began to understand that life's unpredictability might bring moments of separation, challenges, or unforeseen circumstances. Yet, instead of fear, they approached this realization with a sense of appreciation. They recognized that each day together was precious, and that the quality of shared moments mattered more than quantity. This understanding brought a deep sense of presence, allowing them to savor ordinary experiences and find meaning in the simplicity of companionship. One quiet evening, they attended a small concert in a modest venue. Enjoying music that felt intimate and reflective, they sat side by side, occasionally exchanging smiles, and absorbed the performance with a sense of shared emotion. The music seemed to capture the essence of their journey, moments of joy, subtle tension, vulnerability, and hope. As the final notes faded, they lingered in their seats, holding hands and reflecting on the beauty of shared experience, recognizing how it had strengthened their bond and shaped their understanding of love. The following weekend, they decided to revisit the coffee shop where they had first met. The familiarity of the space, the aroma of coffee, and the quiet atmosphere evoked memories of the beginning of their journey. They spoke softly, recalling the initial meeting, the laughter, the small gestures, and the quiet moments that had built their connection. It was a full-circle moment, reflection on how far they had come and the depth of understanding and trust that had grown between them. In the weeks that followed, they continued to build their lives together, embracing both ordinary and special moments with a sense of intentionality. They supported each other through personal challenges, celebrated achievements, and found comfort in the quiet assurance of presence. Their relationship was not defined by dramatic events, but by consistency, empathy, and the accumulation of shared experiences that fostered trust, understanding, and emotional depth.